we need to actually recess our executive session and go back into it later. So I would like to ask my colleagues for a motion to recess our meeting and then to go back into it at 8:15 tonight. Do I have a first?
So moved, Mr. President.
Have a first by Mr. Weaver,
Second.
second by Mr. Schnetzer. Any discussion on this item? Okay, Jeremy, please call the roll.
Weaver.
Yes.
Schnetzer.
Yes.
McGregor.
Yes.
Padova.
Yes.
Renner.
Yes,
Angelou.
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
thank you. Trade places.
Trade you. Are you ready? Okay. Good evening. I'm calling to order tonight's City of Gahanna Committee of the Whole for Monday, June the 13th, 2022. The first, we have a couple of, well, just one addition or correction to the agenda. If there are any more, please let me know. The administration has asked that we remove item number E2, resolution dash 0016 dash 2022 from tonight's agenda, and we will expect that to be back on at a later date.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other additions or corrections to the agenda tonight?
Okay, thank you.
All right, hearing none, we'll move into section B. The first item under discussions is a finance update with discussion on the capital improvement plan. And I will turn this over to Mr. Schnetzer to lead this conversation, I believe with the administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So before providing an update, I'll just recap. So I apologize, some of this will be a bit redundant, but I thought it might be worth recapping just for the benefit of the record here. So what is a CIP, or a capital improvement plan? It's a long-term strategy that guides responsible and transparent investments in capital improvements for the city, such as public infrastructure, facilities, and equipment such as playgrounds, fleet, snowplows, streetlights, et cetera, as well as land acquisitions. So with that being said, or using that as a predicate, I'll talk about some steps that have been taken to date. The administration began work on this last fall in concept. After that, those conceptual meetings, the firm of the Insight Advisory Group, which everyone in this room probably knows as Jennifer Six and her staff, they were engaged to lead the project. Work on outlining various processes soon followed. The consultants, again, the Insight Advisory Group, were provided with a litany of documents that the city had already developed, such as the Gahanna Thoroughfare Plan, Go Forward Gahanna, the Facilities Assessment, the Future Land Use Plan, the 2022 CNA, or Capital Needs Assessment, MORPC's Transportation Plan, and so on. The Insight Group, as well as the administration, began preliminary interviews or discovery meetings with department heads to understand the scope of what would be needed, and again, incorporating all of those aforementioned plans. Council probably remembers back in February, so late Q1, an overview, or a general overview of a CIP was presented to council. Since then, the working group has established various planning districts and collated all of the projects identified by the department heads, as well as all projects identified in various plans that were covered. Some that were not recurring have been removed, and others that have been added. And the goal here is targeting efficiencies such that projects can be combined, that would also help in identifying grant opportunities to, of course, lower the cost to the residents of this city. Next steps that everyone can anticipate, currently in the process of assigning budget numbers to those projects. We anticipate a public input session likely to be late July or early August. There's anticipated to be a workshop with council prior to the public input, and then follow up with a deep dive workshop with council after the public input. The goal is to have the CIP adopted prior to presentation of the 2023 budget by the administration later this year. So with that, I suppose I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Chair. I don't know if the administration has anything they want to add to that.
Madam Mayor?
I actually don't. I think that was a pretty thorough explanation of where we are right now, unless there's any questions from council.
Any questions or discussion on this item?
No, just thank you, Mr. Snesser.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, so no action items or asks from council, timelines or anything like that at this
No,
point?
ma'am, just an update as far as kind of what to anticipate.
Okay. All right, the next item under B2 is an economic development training series. I will have Mr. Renner introduce this.
Thank you. Is everybody ready for summer school? This idea came up between the administration, Nate, Mayor, Marissa Bowers, and myself, and taking a step back a little bit, we have a lot of developmental issues, and there are some fundamental concepts in development, and we have new people, and we also recognize that some of these concepts are a little bit tenuous and tough to deal with from the public's point of view. So we thought that it would be really good to have a series. They'll be at our committee of the whole, and Nate Strum will be the star teacher. And then he has a planned list of guest speakers to come in for various subjects. But we're going to talk about all the pros and cons of economic development and the impacts therein, and everything that goes into that. And understanding, one of the things that I'll tell you on the years that I've been in council is really trying to understand the nuts and bolts of how a deal is actually being put together and how it's going to be, how it's made. And then what are the impacts of those deals? And so therefore, this course, this series, it'll be throughout the summer. I think it'll be 6 committee of the whole. Don't quote me on that. But the idea is to go through every single one of these items in economic development space and understand the pros and the cons, the impacts, how these deals are made, and for all of us to be lifted up a little bit from council and the public to understand and have better productive conversations when we talk about development.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll just add a little bit onto this, is that, you know, things have changed across the region in terms of incentive policy and what it might take to bring the type of development to Gahanna that we want to see. And so, you know, what we are hoping to get out of this is information from not just internal economic development perspective, but also some external perspective too, on what type of incentives are being used across the region, why are we using incentives, and how can we best be involved in policy around incentives so that we can really help shape how we're being good stewards of tax dollars here as well. One of the items that I know came up last year was around calculation of ROI on some of those economic development sheets. And so what we're hoping to see is a really thorough explanation of where do these ROI analyses come from, how are they calculated, what are some potentially competing ways in which different theories in calculating ROI. So hopefully it gives us a really a deeper dive and a more nuanced dive into incentive policy, and that way we can really weigh in and help shape that and help educate each other and bring more information to the public as well. So we're looking forward to this, and thanks to Nate and Economic Development Department for working with us on pulling that together. So stay tuned. Hopefully each session will only be about 20 minutes or so is kind of the goal, 20 to 30 minutes at committee of the whole meetings kind of throughout the summer.
I think that Director Strum has about 30 minutes planned
Okay, great.
for this. And I appreciate your opportunity to schedule this into Committee of the Whole. Director Strum, before his life in Gahanna, started a year ago, actually has been a speaker on this topic nationwide. He's president of MODE, which is another organization that supports economic development within the state. He was also an officer of OEDA, Ohio Economic Development Association. So he is used to this type of presentation, and I know has lined up, I think, a great field of speakers, because we recognize, don't take our word for it, hear from some other people. But I would like to stress the fact that we have one of the top 5 development directors in the state. That's not my words, those are people coming from the state. He's been around the block before, he knows what he's talking about, and he's instructed other people on this as well. So that being said, I know that he's put together a great palette of speakers to come in and talk with us. Our development numbers are going through the roof. We know that from what we experienced last year with over $180 million of new capital investment in the city, and there's more to come. We are not slowing down. So we want you to be comfortable when we, the administration, come to you with a project, and we want you to understand what has happened, and the community to understand what has happened before we ever bring a project to you. The work that has gone through, the evaluation that has gone through, the factors that have been considered, and also position you so that you are prepared to ask the questions that you need to have to truly and effectively evaluate what we're bringing to you. So looking forward to summer school.
Great. Any questions or discussion on this item? All right, thank you. All right, moving to Section C on the agenda, items from the Department of Finance. The first item is Resolution Number 0015-2022, a resolution adopting the tax budget of the City of Gahanna, Ohio for the fiscal year beginning January 1, 2023. Director Burry.
Good evening, everybody. So what I have in front of you is a tax budget for 2023. This is required by Ohio Revised Code. Is to be filed with the county auditor by July 20th. So requesting a resolution to approve the tax budget and authorize me to file it with the county auditor. It'll go to the County Budget Commission. They will use it to determine that all of our property tax levies should be authorized and approved without modification. The end product of this will be around October. There'll be an ordinance that comes before you from the County Budget Commission that certifies the tax levies and amounts which you'll need to accept.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion on this item? All right. All right. Thank you, Director Burry. And is this a statutory resolution or just a single read resolution?
It's just a single
Okay.
resolution, yeah.
So consent agenda? All right. Thank you. All right, moving on to Section D, items from the Department of Public Safety. We have one item from Public Safety, Ordinance Number 0030-2022, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a school resource officer SRO contract with the Gahanna Jefferson Public Schools for the 2022-2023 school year, waiving second reading and declaring an emergency. Chief?
Good evening, Council. This is the standard contract that was passed, no substantive changes from previous years. This is for the 2022-2023 school year. It represents about a 2.4% increase from the previous school year's contract for a total not to exceed amount of $208,584. That's for 75% of the salary and benefits of one of the officers anchored at Gahanna Lincoln High School and 50% of the salary and benefits of the second officer. Those changes from, it used to be a 50% for each of those two officers. That change was made in the 1920 school year. Reason for the waiver and emergency, as you know, we're still working through the agreement with the FOP. The officers bargaining unit has passed that agreement. The tentative or the negotiations with the supervisors contingent is still pending. We hope we'll bring that to resolution very quickly. As this contract only applies to the officer bargaining unit and their salary and benefits. That's why we're bringing it forward. And then we also have to bring it before the school board so that we can have it passed and in place by the start of the school year in early August.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions or discussion on this item?
So the reason for the emergency, I mean, it's the same thing we do every year, is because of the contract discussions? I mean, why it's later than usual?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
We were still waiting on salary and benefits. That's primarily where we are with the collective bargaining agreement. But as I said, the officers unit has accepted the city's proposal. And as this contract only impacts that bargaining unit, that's why we're bringing it forward now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Renner?
Thank you. Chief, I want to ask something, and you've known me a long time, that I've been a very strong supporter of the SRO program, and I've been a very strong supporter of our police. They are trained officers, trained in multiple scenarios. And so today, the governor of the state of Ohio has signed a bill making it easy for teachers to have guns inside our schools. So moving that aside, my question to you then is, are the SROs and the schools, have you had any discussions about the changed dynamic inside our schools?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Yes, we're aware of the governor's, the passage of the law that the governor signed today. That decision, when it comes to arming teachers, it still rests with the school board. They still have to make, to authorize within their own bodies the ability for teachers within those respective districts to be armed. I would just say, I think in our district in particular, I think that's kind of a heavy lift. I would say that maybe that decision is different in a very rural setting where first responders are as far away as a half hour, 45 minutes away. I think that changes the dynamic. So we have not had any discussions regarding that. If anything came up, you know, I think is there opinion? Is there, you know, I think it's a little too early to tell how this is going to be embraced at the school district level. So I hope I answered the
You did,
question.
because I wanted to keep it local. I understand and appreciate the wide variety, but I wasn't aware that the local school district can actually have a choice in the matter.
Yes, it is solely at the district's discretion whether to authorize within their individual districts. And as I understand the bill, the minimum required by the state is 24 hours of training that the district can opt to increase that level of training.
Okay. That's it. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Chief, could you speak a little bit to the public response or parent feedback that you received for the SRO program in Gahanna schools?
Everything from the compliments that come through my office to the safety director, the mayor, the daily engagements that the officers have. These are long tenured officers with a lot of years of experience. We do have a new officer after Officer Hickson retired about a year and a half ago. We did bring in Officer Gary Lawrence, again, another long tenured officer. The ability of those officers to interact, really they're not in an enforcement role. They're there as mentors, they're there as educators. And let's be honest, they're there as a first line of this defense and response. But everything that we've engaged from students, teachers, staff, parents, I think we're able to have an impact that really we will never know. Maybe it will be years in the future. We still have students that are now in their late 30s, early 40s coming and remembering what the positive impact that our first SROs, Dean Blamer, Joe Eastep, had on their lives. So I think the benefits of that program are immeasurable, to be honest with you. I don't know that we can always quantify them, but by the level of feedback that we get on a near daily basis, it's significant.
Any other questions or discussion on this item?
If I
Yes,
may.
Ms. Padova.
So I did not grow up in a school where they had school resource officers. Can you give us just a little bit of overview of kind of what their duty is there, as far as like at what point are they called into classrooms, and like what are the main
I mean, most of
obviously
our
the safety.
response to incidents inside the school, if it's a police response, is at the direction of the school district, school officials. Again, as I said, our primary role is not an enforcement one. They spend time in classrooms, but that's more of an educator role. We do everything in a typical day, from monitoring the traffic flowing in and out at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. We deal with a lot of pedestrians in a very short amount of time, a lot of vehicular traffic. So they're there to monitor that. They teach a variety of classes, both at the high school, middle school, and elementary school level. Project Alert is one of them. There's several others. They typically engage with the mental health counselors, the mental health professionals within the school. Obviously, we have a significant mental health issue in all grade levels. So there's a lot of putting community resources together that the SROs they know those kids. They know their families. They know the situations that they're growing up in. They know the services that have been provided and the service providers, if they're involved with, say, for example, Franklin County Children's Services. They act as a conduit between all of those service providers. So really, it's a very it's not a typical police role that they're in at least in the model that we have. And again, they are there as a law enforcement presence to act as a deterrent and also provide safety and security to the building. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It sounds like they wear a lot of hats,
Many.
to say the least.
Also, they attend special events, everything from proms and sporting events. Again, they know each one of those students by first name, can tell you a lot of things about them, and that's what works best for us and works best for the district is that approach.
Mr. Weaver?
Madam Chair, thank you. I just want to add my thanks and my accolades to the program here in the city of Gahanna. I think I've said it many times up here. I'm a proud product of Gahanna Jefferson Public Schools, and I remember with great fondness, particularly Officer Blamer being a fixture in the hallways, and as the chief said, knew everyone, whether or not it was somebody who frequently came across the program or was availing themselves of the myriad of services. Officer Blamer knew everyone, and to Chief's point, I frequently saw Officer Blamer at sporting events or even at the theater performances. So just thank you, and thanks to our SROs here in the community.
Real quick, I probably didn't expand a little bit. So there are two SROs are anchored at the high school by virtue of this contract. The city provides the costs, all costs associated with a third SRO that goes to the middle schools, the elementary schools, and then St. Matt's and the private schools as well. And then in addition to that, we have a sergeant who is a fully trained and qualified SRO as well. So if we have any types of gaps in coverage, obviously we went through COVID, so we had some officers in that unit that were off or quarantined, so the sergeant would fill in. And then adding to that unit, and really a separate and distinct function, as our community liaison officer. Kelly, she came on board here within the last 2 months, but she'll work in and out of that role as well. And that's kind of an extension of some of the functions of an SRO, that she's going to work more closely with those service providers, Franklin County Children's Services, our community paramedic, Kenny King, all of our mental health providers that are in and around and service Gahanna and our residents. So she's going to be kind of an extra pair of hands, but a more specialized conduit to those resources.
Mr. Schnitzer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to underscore the value of the program, my ears perked up, Chief, when you were talking about the SROs knowing the students intimately. While I don't have direct firsthand knowledge of the program and the daily interactions that go on over there, people that do have reported back to me through the years about precisely what you just described, where an officer, you know, they know the students, they know the family structure, they know any challenges that might be occurring at any given time. And when they see it, there's an opportunity to intercept something that may spiral out of control. So it's kind of the, you know, diffusing a situation or diverting a situation. And I don't know how you can really put a price tag on the value of something like that when you're talking about a young person's life where it could potentially spiral out of control. And if they're able to intercept it and you know, I guess calm it down, so to speak, to put it plainly, I just think it's a really valuable and it's something I'm happy to support.
Thank you.
All right, anything else for discussion tonight? All right. I know historically we've been putting second waiver and emergency on regular agenda. Would there be any opposition to adding this to consent agenda for next Monday? Okay,
It's regular and routine, I'm fine with it.
okay. All right, so consent agenda for this item. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to section E on the agenda, items from the Department of Public Service and Engineering. First item, well, we've got just one item tonight. Ordinance number 0031-2022, an ordinance accepting Taylor Station Road roadway infrastructure improvements, interim engineer Ridge.
Thank you. So the acceptance of the infrastructure improvements completed as part of the private development plan is more of a formality. It's one that the city hasn't had to do in a little while. So Gahanna Code Chapter 1107 requires the city to formally accept new public infrastructure improvements that are completed as part of a private development plan. It's best practice to accept these improvements so that the city can maintain them properly. As part of the Adams Point development located in Jefferson Township, Taylor Station Road, which is a Gahanna roadway, was widened to include turning lanes to accommodate the traffic associated with Adams Point development. Construction also included stormwater and water improvements that were necessary to facilitate that widening. Taylor Station Road has been identified in the City of Gahanna thoroughfare plan to be widened. So by this being, this portion of Taylor Station Road being widened as part of this development, we are saving the City of Gahanna taxpayers approximately $334,000. The improvements have been completed, and the developer has requested that the infrastructure be accepted per Gahanna Code. The Taylor Station roadway improvements meet the basic requirements for acceptance, and that the underground utilities and roadway have passed all necessary inspections and testing. The Department of Public Service and Engineering respectfully requests Ordinance to officially accept the infrastructure improvements made to the Taylor Station Road.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions regarding this item? All right, so, yes.
I just want to say, I'm really glad to see that Gahanna did this and required them to widen the road there, because so many times, I mean, just drive up Hamilton Road north of Morse, and all the stuff they're having to do now after it's all built, you know, and if they had done it sort of before it was done, it would have been much easier project and less impactful on the citizens. So I'm glad to see that we're doing this.
Yes. As part of all of our, and when things come through Planning Commission, we do try to look for what our thoroughfare plan has identified and try to make sure that they incorporate any additions right away for us to make improvements later, doing the improvements themselves. We do look for that. And I know that there's several other of these in the next few years you'll have coming your way because we have this on several other development projects.
Great, thank you. And so even though this parcel is in Jefferson Township, we were able to require this through our planning commission process?
So since it is adjacent to our roadway, we are part of that review of their plans.
Okay.
Just like if it's the other way around, if it's a Gahanna property in county road or township road, then we coordinate with them on that. So we always get together as agencies to come up with the best plan with that development coming in. It impacts both of us and make those updates, yes.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so first reading and then consent? Yes, all right, thank you. All right, the next item we have is under section F, items from the mayor's office. One item, ordinance number 003-2-2022, an ordinance repealing and replacing Gahanna Code section 549.10, prohibiting the discharging, igniting, or exploding of fireworks in the city of Gahanna, waiving second reading and declaring an emergency.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Gahanna Code Section 549.10, as it currently exists right now, already prohibits the discharging, igniting, and exploding of fireworks within the city of Gahanna. As we all know from recent news articles, there was a state law that was passed that will go into effect July 1 that will eliminate that prohibition statewide. But that state law also provided a mechanism for municipalities such as Gahanna to opt out of that legislation. Recently, the city of Columbus, I think it was just about a week or two ago, passed legislation banning fireworks going off within the city of Columbus. Several other municipalities, I think Upper Arlington, Bexley, Dublin, Powell, Grove City, Worthington, who else am I missing? Westerville doesn't need to do it because theirs already the way it's worded, they didn't need to revise it, have passed or are in the process of passing similar legislation to opt out of the state's permissive law. The ordinance that's being proposed tonight is a repeal and replacement of our existing code. And actually, if our city attorney wants to jump in, he can, but it was our city attorney's perspective that the provisions that were removed were those that referred back to the Ohio Revised Code that will no longer be applicable. So instead of just redlining things out, it was better to just rewrite the code. So this is a repeal and a replacement. However, it will maintain the existing ban that we have. There's no language that's different than that regard. It will be, again, the same existing ban that we have right now on discharging, igniting, or exploding fireworks. From a public safety perspective, this continues the ability of our police and our fire to maintain some level of control over fireworks going off within the city. If we did not put this ban into place, it would basically be a free-for-all. So this does give them the ability to maintain some level of control. Certainly, education and awareness are always the primary mechanisms that they use to try to curb that type of behavior within the community. But again, without an actual enforcement mechanism, it really wouldn't matter. So having something in place after discussions with our public safety team, Director Wynn, Chief Spence, and Deputy Director Lawless. I almost made him a director. DC is not even here. But we had, and our city attorney, we had extensive conversations around what would be in the best interest of the health and welfare of the citizens of Gahanna. And it was very much the public safety perspective that not only to maintain the public safety of the community, but a quality of life issue for our community that we needed to keep the ban that's already in place continuing after the state law goes into place. So we are asking for an emergency and waiver, obviously given the July 1st effective date of the state law, having a waiver of second reading and having the legislation go into effect as soon as it becomes passed and it would be signed would be of primary importance in order to have the ban in place before the July 1st weekend.
Any questions? Yes, I'll go down the line. Ms. Angelou?
Well, questions, I've heard firecrackers just recently, and indeed what will happen if people are doing that?
Sure.
What is,
I'm going to refer to Chief Spence.
As the mayor said, our primary response is really just an education and a warning. That usually in about 99% of the responses takes care of the problem. We're not out actively stopping people that are igniting fireworks. It's entirely complaint-based. I can tell you that the complaints, especially July 4th, if you look at our run records after the city's fireworks show ends, we'll run nonstop into the early morning hours on fireworks complaints. So imagine that multiplied by every day of the year, potentially. We still receive a number of complaints, even from commercial exhibitors. This past weekend, and it's annual, there was an event at Jefferson Country Club. They have a commercial fireworks permit. They have a very nice show from what I've seen, but we receive a number of complaints from Hunter's Ridge and those neighborhoods when that show occurs. There is a commercial fireworks permit that's been issued for the Harrison Pond Civic Association for this Saturday night. I'm quite confident that we'll receive a number of complaints related to that show as well. And then they are not regulated, and I would say in the unincorporated areas that to our east. So there are a number of large homes, large parcels. They'll have purchased fireworks shows that rival any of the commercial shows at times. I can think of one house in particular that has a pretty elaborate show on the 4th of July. We typically get a lot of complaints from residents within the city that kind of abut that property. So really no change in how things will be handled moving forward with this repeal and replace. And I think it also, this provides us continuity because all the communities surrounding us, Columbus and the like, are following in similar step. So,
will this be sent out to all of the people in Gahanna that this is going to be in effect?
We would do a communication, not only social media, but update on our website as well. I don't know that having a mailer to 15,000 households is something that we would do, particularly given timing right now. But certainly we would push that out in the various mechanisms that we have available.
Could you possibly go to the various places that, I mean, we have groups of people that, work together and...
Well, certainly I would say, I know Chief Spence's monthly Civic Association meeting, that's a great way to disseminate information to the various neighborhoods, to then have those neighborhood chairs send those out to the people within their communities. I think that's probably one of the most viable options and quickest, quite frankly, to get information out.
Thank you.
Mr. Weaver?
My question was around any possible confusion and getting the word out to residents, so I'm good. Thank you.
Mr. Schnetzer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question is for the administration, if maybe you'd be willing to share a bit more detail on some of the internal discussions and whether or not there were consideration for some form of compromise, I guess. This is coming from the perspective or the vantage point that I think a lot of people are aware of, the news headline that says the Ohio law has changed. And I'm sure that's what Councilwoman Angelo and Councilman Weaver were referring to here is that, we may see an uptick in those calls, Chief, this 4th of July. Has there been any consideration about those large lots that you had mentioned and perhaps permitting it? My understanding of the Ohio law, while not entirely detailed, I've read a couple of the articles and it seems like it's limited to certain holidays and things of that nature. And so it isn't 365 days a year, but it's a handful of holidays. And obviously one of them is coming up here pretty soon. So just curious if there's an opportunity to find some sort of middle ground here as opposed to a wholesale ban on everything all the time.
I'll take an initial pass at that, and I'll let Chief tag on if he'd like. We did have a discussion about that actually an extensive discussion about that. Ultimately, where we came out on that, again, listening to our public safety experts, was, you just had the concern raised around communication to residents. So having the communication around, it's okay this day, but it's not this day, and it's okay this day, and it's not this day, would actually create more effort and more challenges for us from an enforcement mechanism to try to communicate that to residents about when it is and is not allowed, rather than just maintaining a ban that we currently already have in place. So Chief, I'll allow you to expound a little bit differently on that, or perhaps in greater detail, because I know we did talk about that.
No, I think that really hits the nail on the head. It's just to avoid confusion, because, again, we get complaints on July 4th. We get complaints on any day that somebody sets off fireworks and it's not an actual show like that they're used to. We had complaints over the weekend. I think it's just trying to provide continuity, unity of message among our neighboring communities. Again, we're not. I want to set the expectation, we're not out there actively issuing citations. We're not arresting people. We're giving them a friendly warning. Chances are, by the time we've gotten the call and we've arrived, the show is over. But again, I think of some of those larger scale and understand, yes, maybe we have one parcel that could, if we got into permitting it on certain areas within Gahanna. The problem is these fireworks, even the ones that you can buy just, in these fireworks stores, are so big, are so loud, they look like commercial fireworks. It's just the ground clearance that they reach. We had many complaints over the weekend related to a commercial, to an authorized show, one that had an actual permit. I just think this is the best way to contain it and be consistent with our residents' expectations.
I guess, Chief, to that point, and just my question was similar to Mr. Schnetzer's. My understanding is that some of our neighboring communities have actually carved out the exceptions. Not all of them have enforced the blanket ban. I know Reynoldsburg was considering a law that mimicked the holiday exceptions. My question is, though, is that if our law allows fireworks on certain days of the year, aren't we spending less time responding to these calls if the dispatcher could say it's permitted in Gahanna on today, and so then we're not sending out officers?
Unfortunately, the people that are affected by those fireworks and it's everything from animals that are susceptible to those loud noises, people with potential mental health that are affected by loud noises. They don't care what day of the week. They're going to call us anyway. So I think, yes, I understand. And the only community that I'm aware of, I know that Reynoldsburg was considering it. I don't know that they've passed any carve-outs. Everybody else that we had checked with had basically done exactly as we are doing. The only community that I'm aware of that took no action was the city of Hilliard.
Hilliard.
Yeah, they took no action.
Okay.
Again, I think it's can we revisit it and see how things how the community adjusts? I'm just trying to give a best case of what will work. I mean, we really don't know until the state law changes, and maybe it just becomes people become. I don't see it as people becoming more tolerant, because again, just based on the number of calls that we get, and it's on July 4th when people would expect fireworks, and we receive a number of calls.
Madam Chair.
One more follow-up. And I am also just a little concerned. I know that this was existing, but why keep it in M1? Why not reduce it to a first offense being something much lower? Any
I mean,
thoughts on
we'd
that?
certainly be open to that again.
Okay.
I think the
I know enforcement is not the primary goal of
I think the
this.
reasoning behind that is a lot of we consider a lot of these to be very harmless. But I can tell you that what we see in terms of the ones that are misused and cause the most damage, I mean, these are, when I've seen these are what I would consider a commercial grade firework. They have the extremely high explosive potential, and you know, we've seen blast injuries, we've seen thermal injuries. So I think the M1 was keeping in perspective the potential for serious physical harm as a result of their misuse. And that was kind of the focus of the penalty section, not just throwing the occasional firework or the bottle rocket. It's really dealing with those large caliber, large explosive content fireworks that we're seeing much more of.
Is there a gradient that you would be able to distinguish here so that we could make that distinction, perhaps if we have a different administration or a different?
Again, I think we would be open if council would like to amend that to, say, an M4 or, you know, maybe on a second offense, an M1.
Yeah.
I think that would be perfectly fine with us.
Basically, I'd note two things. One, you have to opt out by July 1st. That's the purpose of this. You can always opt back in. You can always add these things back in. You can always change the law. But if we don't opt out by the 1st, then everything the state does gets incorporated, including aerials. Aerials seem to be a big problem because it has to stay on your property. How do you do that? It lands on someone else's house, you know, then it becomes a problem. It just seemed like opting out at this point was the best thing to get a better feel as to how we might want to tailor this if we do want to add some carves out. One of the things might be, we did just do the M1 because it was an M1. You know, it could be reduced. All these things could be changed. But if we don't opt out now, we don't opt out at all.
Was the M1 a change, or that's always what it's been?
That's what
It's been that way.
It's always been,
Forever.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we just kept it the
Right.
same.
Right, the only thing that has changed from this version to the, from the existing version to what is now being proposed to be in effect, is the references back to Ohio Revised Code that no longer will be in effect.
You're good with that? Mrs. Angelou?
Safety, that's what we're trying to get here, is safety. And I see some of them in my neighborhood, they go up and they get onto our street, and it's almost like they're burning the street, which also creates even, opportunities to, now we have to go and fix that particular street because of that. So I do think that they should not be allowed. And I would like to know, are we going to have a 4th of July fireworks?
Yes, we are.
We don't need them except for, obviously those, we don't need them in our neighborhoods when we were going to have a beautiful opportunity to have that. And I think Columbus is also going to be having their big one again, like they've always had, except for the last couple of years. So I know it's got to be fun for some people, but for other people it's not. I can recall not liking the sound and whatever and being scared of things. What's going on? Was that a gun or was that a, whatever? And so I just think that we should always be concerned on safety. And if there's something that's unsafe, then we should probably be trying not to have it around. I'm an old lady. Don't liking that sound.
There are some timing provisions in terms of hours and that got into the state law. I think they become a little problematic as well from a community expectation standpoint. And then I think Mrs. Angelou did bring up something that's worth noting. We do respond to calls of celebratory gunfire. It's become extremely, I would say, much more prevalent in the last few years than it has ever in the past. We deal with that quite often. The average resident sometimes doesn't know the difference between fireworks and gunfire. Our officers do. They've heard it many times. Just something to be considered that it does. These do affect people and impact them from how they feel in terms of their safety, and it's kind of hard for us to determine how people are going to react. They're always going to call us. They're going to be concerned.
I think for me, I'd really like to see at least a first offense be a lower misdemeanor if it's an M4, and then a subsequent offense being an M1. That for me would be an important distinction here. And it doesn't seem like that would be that big of a lift to get this through for next Monday, since it'll just be on for first reading with waiver and emergency. So that's my weigh in on it.
Yeah, I don't, we wouldn't have an objection to M4, subsequent offense, and M1.
I don't see why we can't just leave it as it is, and then if we want to change it later at another date, change it then. I don't think this is, to me, it's not that big a deal. I mean, it's been this way forever, and I don't know that have we ever even issued a citation for an M1?
Well, I guess I had a question around, you're talking about an M1 for a second offense? Is that what, or, I'm sorry, what did you say, M4 for first offense?
Any subsequent offense could be charged as an M1, but a first offense would be an M4.
So-
So an M4 still carries potential of 30 days in jail, and an M1 carries up to 180 days in jail.
So I guess the question that I would have, if we're looking at going back and amending this, that was one issue I heard, first offense versus second offense, but then I also heard a reference to potentially, if we were to do a gradient from something that is a small firework to a commercial grade, would we want to go back through, if we're going to really look at this, do we want to take a wider expanse?
I think easier is better. I think first offense M4 and a second M1. I believe the concern is an M1 is usually viewed as an arrestable offense, and we want to give some deference to issuing a citation at first and then escalating it from there.
Yeah,
And-
thanks for clarifying that,
Yes.
Chief, yeah.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Schnitzer.
I would just add, I support your proposal. It sounds like the chief's on board with that as well. I just think if in practice, we're not throwing the book at violations the first time, that practice should mirror what we're passing here, since it's already opened up and it's in front of us. So it just seems logical that we would kind of lower the threshold perhaps, or lower the penalty for any first offense.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this item?
Is this, okay, so say somebody blatantly like we're saying, it's really an offense with a large caliber or whatever of fireworks, so they would not be able to charge him with a higher offense? If it's a blatant,
On
you know.
the first offense, under Gahanna code, it would be charged as an M4, but if they were called back out, they could charge it as a subsequent offense.
And there are other offenses that could be applicable that would potentially be a companion charge, like, for example, criminal damaging or endangering. That's something that could be added and to something where there was, say, damage to property or damage, or physical harm. There are other offenses that we would likely and certainly would charge somebody with.
okay.
Thank you.
Does that answer that question?
And I thank you, because I think that was my concern as well, as if there was a.
Yes, there would probably, we would, in that case, we would certainly look at it.
Other
as
code,
Other
codes that
other
would potentially be
violations would
applicable.
most certainly be present and would be charged in addition to the cause, which would be the fireworks violation.
Thank you, Chief. All right, thank you for the discussion on that item. Thank you, Mayor and City Attorney.
So is an amendment requested, or where do we stand?
Thank you.
Yeah, yes, I have supported that. I think Mr. Schnitzer has
Yes.
supported that. Mr. Weaver's nodding.
I agree.
Ms. Padova's nodding.
Okay, so M4 first, M1 second, within what time period? If they get a second offense, within what time period?
Any time period, any subsequent offense.
Okay.
I'll leave that to the discretion of your office and the chief, if you guys have any other opinion on that.
I would concur, any M4 on a first offense, any subsequent in M1, because that would give us additional leverage if we had a
Okay.
habitual offender, chronic problem property, we could address it quickly.
So then how does that need to come back to council? How does
Does it have to be an amendment? It can be just changed and put on as,
Right, yeah, right.
because
Yeah,
it
I
hasn't-
wouldn't need to be an amendment, yeah,
It
correct,
hasn't
been
We
So we
presented
have,
yet, so,
okay,
yeah.
so we amend that for then next week. That was,
correct, yeah.
Jeremy, get with me.
Will do.
All right, I would like that item to be on regular agenda since it is something that we do want the public to be aware of, and we'll have a little bit more opportunity to kind of elucidate on that at our next meeting. All right. Section G, items from council office. The first item is motion that we've discussed a lot, motion MT-0014-2022, a motion to amend the rules of procedure of the Council of the City of Gahanna, Section 6.30, hearing of visitors, establishing subsection 6.30A, in-person, and 6.30B via video. I had requested that this item be brought back to Committee of the Whole at our last council meeting, and I think that was voted on unanimously by my colleagues to bring this back to committee. The issue is that I believe that we had some weigh-in from the city attorney on revising this rule. I have not had an opportunity to discuss this with the city attorney. I don't know if any of my colleagues have yet either. I guess at this point, maybe we should just keep it on Committee of the Whole. That way we can have an opportunity to talk about it with Mr. Malarski. Any discussion?
No, I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right.
Question I would just have, it looks like you're trying to limit this type of presentation to only things that are on the docket for that day. Is that accurate?
There's been discussion, I think, around that, and feel free to weigh in if anybody else has some thought. There's been sort of discussion kind of around that. I think at this point, if that would help you feel more confident that we were positioning ourselves to maybe have this be a success, I'm certainly receptive to that. I don't think that there was any kind of unanimous decision or general consent on that particular point, though.
When I read it in that manner, I thought, well, I like that better because it gives you more control over this type of stuff. For instance, the chief's gone, but he had sent me a tape from Grove City with when Brian Weaver appeared last week and rambled on and on and on about everything that wasn't on the docket. And I foresee, you'd asked me this question, I couldn't foresee Brian Weaver doing this. He's not allowed on our property, but it doesn't prevent him from espousing his views. So I believe that under the Sunshine Law, he would be able to provide a video like this. And so I think that would enable us to keep it controlled. If he wants to talk about what's on the docket, well, that's fine. But if he wants to talk about something way over here like he normally does, or he did in that video that I saw, it gives us, and I'm using him as an example, but anyone who does that, it gives us the ability to do that. But again, that's up to you guys, it's your rules, but I liked that when I saw it, or at least when I thought that's what you were going for, because it does give you more control over this type of a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Malarski. Ms. McGregor?
I will say that the communication we had from you and Matt Roth gave me a lot. I've not been so much in favor of being a lot of concerns about this, and that kind of gave me even more. I think this is really, I mean, I've said it before, I think this has the potential for great problems. And I think that's, I think that there is the potential for a lot of abuse and great problems with doing this.
Thank you.
I agree with you.
So if there were to be the requirement that it be related to a agenda item, in addition to it being limited to 3 minutes and screened for profanity or threats, Does that yield any greater comfort on this item?
I think you're just, somebody is going to have to make the decision, this is okay or this isn't. And somebody else will disagree with their opinion. And that puts that person in a hard place, the person who's making the decision whether it's appropriate or not. And I think that it's just, there's all kinds of mischief that could happen. So really, that doesn't make a difference to me.
Yes,
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Weaver.
Thank you. First, thank you for the concerns, Mr. City Attorney. I appreciate you taking a look. And I think I would be good with that. And to Councilwoman McGregor's point, I think where I certainly hear the concern, I think where I differ is I don't necessarily see the difference between somebody making that evaluation, watching a video, and council president determining that a speaker in front of us has crossed those lines. If that makes, if a speaker starts going off the rails and cursing at us or, threatening.
I think there's less inhibition in doing a video where you don't have to personally be in front of people and just sending something in as opposed to, that's what
Understood.
If I may,
Yes, Ms. Padova.
I see your point. I do agree with Mr. Weaver that it isn't a lot, there's not a lot of difference between them being up there, being right there if they start going off the rails. Although it would be much easier to just turn the video out than, or turn the video off than have somebody yelling down the hallway. So in that regard, it would actually be easier to end. But I do think that in doing a video, I think that it is very unlikely that somebody will take a video of themselves and upload it without looking back at it, watching it before they upload it, or maybe not, but they will. I don't think that will be a lot of our audience.
well,
but I do think that, I think that of doing a video is much different than rattling off a comment on a social media site. You're taking the time to do the video, to fill out the form, to upload it. There are steps in place where it's not something that, I think it makes it more unlikely that somebody will really make a video going off the rails in fury and uploading it to us. And I do not, I don't have any objections to having it specifically to an agenda item. We originally went down this road to give people an opportunity to talk to us if they have something to say and they're not able to make it in here. So if it's not about a specific agenda item or something that we're voting on, then that they have more time to get to us to make it in here. Whereas if we're voting on something that night, they want to be heard and they want it to be public, they can attach a video to an agenda item. It can be played that night. We can see it. The public can see it. And I don't have any objections to that. I think that makes sense and is fitting.
Mr. Weaver, Mr. Renner or Mr. Schnitzer, do you have any thoughts at this time about this item?
Everybody's making good points, and if we want to give it a shot, and if it goes sideways, and pull the plug on it.
Mr. Renner?
I concur.
All right, okay. So we'll make some edits to the proposed rule, send it back through Mr. Malarski's office, and it'll come back on committee of the whole agenda next time for further review, I guess, one more review on committee of the whole. Okay. All right, and I do appreciate everyone, I think everyone, like Mr. Schnitzer said, everyone's making good points, and your concerns are very well taken. I certainly don't want anyone to think that those are not valid concerns. All right, we have 3 resolutions next. These are honorary resolutions. Resolution number 0017-2022, a resolution designating June 2022 as Alzheimer's Awareness and Brain Health Month. This was an item that I think was brought to us last year, and we continued it forward to make sure that we were appropriately addressing the needs and the rising, increase of the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease in our community. Any discussion on this item? All right. Regular agenda? Okay. All right. Resolution 0018-2022, a resolution recognizing and honoring Jonathan Cooley. This was requested to be added to the agenda by Councilmember Weaver. Mr. Weaver, would you like to address this resolution?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it seems like ages ago, but the Super Bowl happened, and one of Gahanna's own was part of the coaching staff for the Los Angeles Rams, and as I sort of joked earlier, he's got more Super Bowl rings than the rest of us up here. And he is a Gahanna Lincoln alum. Actually, we were classmates in 2007. And family's still here in the community, and Jonathan will be, or excuse me, Mr. Cooley will be traveling to visit family here in Gahanna, so he hopefully will be able to attend on Monday. So, happy to answer any questions or make any edits.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Weaver, for drafting this and bringing this forward, and it'll be great to meet Mr. Cooley hopefully next week. Coach Cooley, I should say, right?
So.
Yeah, will he show us his ring? Okay, cool. All right. Maybe we should ask Kevin if we can get a close-up on the cameras of the ring. All right. Next item on the agenda is Resolution -0019-2022, a resolution recognizing Juneteenth, June 19, 2022, in the city of Gahanna. Juneteenth has come to the forefront, I think, of a lot of to attention locally and at the and nationally here of late, and so I had added this resolution to our proposed resolution list to recognize Juneteenth here in Gahanna. The city, we passed a resolution last year which added Juneteenth to our list of observed paid holidays. That's also in conformity with what Franklin County has done. So we have a draft resolution before you. I did circulate a couple edits earlier today. I reviewed this with a friend of mine who works in corporate DE&I, and so there were just, I think, 3 edits that I had been suggested. In the first whereas, clarifying that when Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, enslaved African Americans finally received word that they were free from bondage. And then in the second whereas clause, adding in the language, remembering the immense toll of slavery on Black and African Americans and on the nation, and a date in which citizens are encouraged, et cetera. And then in section 2 of the resolution, bridging the divides, including racial and ethnic biases that limit the health and vitality of our community, state, and nation. Any other discussion, any discussion on this resolution? All right.
Not on this resolution, but just on essentially the 3 that we had just gone over.
Yes.
I guess I'll pose the question to council. Where there is not is there a preference where there is not an actual presentation, a guest in attendance? So with the exception we've heard of Mr. Cooley, is there any opposition to lumping these in on the consent agenda? It seems in some cases, quite a few of them historically are becoming a bit regular and routine, so I didn't know if there was an appetite for that or not. Again, only in the absence of
Yeah.
some sort of a presentation.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. The point of these resolutions, to me, is actually to help recognize and educate, right? And for all of Gahanna citizens. So wherever it is on our agenda, I think it's fine.
Mr. Weaver?
I don't have any objections to putting any on the consent agenda. I think just for the, I'm making some outreach efforts on the Alzheimer's one, and I won't know by the end of this meeting whether or not that's borne any fruit, but I suppose we've taken an agenda from, or excuse me, we've taken a resolution from one item on the agenda and moved it elsewhere, in the past, so that's always a possibility too.
Again, I don't mean to pick on these three, it's more just the concept
Yeah.
of motion resolutions in general. To the extent that some of them are recurring, does it make sense to put them in there in the absence of some sort of a ceremony?
Yeah, absolutely. No concerns with that, with having these two that we know or two that we don't currently have any type of presentation lined up for. And then, of course, if something does happen, we can always move it off of consent. All right, Mrs. McGregor, I'm sorry, we didn't.
The last whereas is just a little,
Which one?
the last one. Bending the arc of the moral universe towards justice, that's, what the heck does that even mean? I can't, that's,
It's from Martin Luther King Jr. It's a quote from one of his speeches.
it is? I've never heard that before. I'll check that out, okay. It just seems a little bit,
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it is in deference to Martin Luther King Jr., his quote, and
shouldn't it be quoted by him, though, and say that that's his quote?
I mean, we could, we could rewrite that so that we reference that. So, so maybe breaking down barriers, comma, and in the words of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., quotes, bending the arc of the moral universe towards justice, unquotes?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, sorry, Madam
Yes,
Chair.
Mr. Weaver.
I think if memory serves, it is a paraphrase of Dr. King's quote, which I believe is the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So
You're
I
right.
don't want to misquote by putting
You're right.
quotes around some.
You're right.
My law professors will have my head, so.
Or to maybe so instead to paraphrase the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.
Or else just put his real words in,
Put his words in.
Okay.
put the actual words in.
Well, now you're going to make me do grammar on the fly because we've got a gerund clause that we're going to have to rework. Jeremy, could we maybe work on this and then circulate it offline?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right, perfect.
A gerund clause?
Gerund, yeah. That's AP Spanish for you.
No, I got it, but it's not common.
You've
cool. It's
you've
cool.
got vocabulary
Yeah.
that's uncommon for us on a regular basis. I learn a new word from Mr. Renner
To
regularly.
convention, so let's go.
Madam Chair, before you adjourn,
Yes, Mayor.
if I could just take a minute and introduce someone new to the room to us. Kevin is not sitting here. He does not look like Kevin. He has hair.
Well,
We'll have to tell Kevin that. Hey, Kevin and I talk about that all the time. However, I'd like to introduce you to our new Public Information Officer, Dan Perlman. He's almost at 1 week. His first day in the office was last Tuesday, so if he shows up tomorrow, he will have made it 1 week. But we threw him right into the fire and threw him on operating live streaming tonight because, you know, we're going to get him in there getting working right away. So wanted you all to have an opportunity to meet him and welcome him as well to the team. I know he's already had his busy week, and I think he'll be a great addition to us. So please say welcome to Dan. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, Mayor. Welcome. All right. Any other items for committee tonight? All right, well then with that, we are adjourned, and I will turn it over to Mr. Renner to reconvene our special meeting. Thank you.
Hey, Jeremy.